They buried her at dawn. By nightfall, the screams started. Villagers swore the sound came from beneath the earth, a woman crying, begging, scratching. But this was no ghost story. This was a true love story, so forbidden, so tragic, that it ended with a bride sealed underground, alive. And what they found when they opened the grave is still written in history as one of the most horrifying proofs that love can kill. This is Echoes of Forbidden Love, a true story from the past. Listen carefully, because every choice they made led them closer to the grave. In the early 1800s, in a cold European countryside where tradition ruled more strongly than law, love was not a personal choice. Marriage was currency. Women were promises, and families traded daughters to protect land, honor, and bloodlines. In this village lived Elena. She was known for her silence, for the way she avoided crowds, for how she watched the road every evening as though waiting for someone who never arrived. Elena was already promised, not to the man she loved, but to a man chosen for her, a wealthy widower, twice her age, a man whose shadow alone made her hands shake. But Elena had already given her heart away. His name was Tomas. He was poor, an apprenticed carpenter, a man with no land, no title, no future, except the one he imagined with her. They met where the village never looked, by the river bend beyond the church bells. No witnesses, no promises spoken aloud, only stolen moments and whispered dreams. Tomas promised her escape. Elena promised patience. But patience is dangerous when time belongs to others. And then someone saw them. One glance, one rumor, and the village began to talk. Elena's family found the letters. They didn't scream, they didn't argue, they decided. The wedding date was moved forward. No delay, no discussion. Elena begged, she cried, she locked herself in her room, but tradition does not listen. On the morning of the wedding, Tomas disappeared. Some said he ran, some said he was chased away. Elena believed something worse had happened. She stood at the altar like someone already dead. Her hands were ice, her vision blurred, and then she collapsed. The priest called it shock, the doctor called it fainting. By nightfall, Elena was pronounced dead. But Elena wasn't dead, and the grave they lowered her into was not empty of hope, only air. They buried Elena before sunset. The priest said prayers quickly. Her family did not cry loudly. The widower stood still, emotionless. The coffin was lowered, soil covered wood, and by nightfall, the cemetery returned to silence. But silence does not always mean peace. Around midnight, a shepherd walking past the graveyard froze. He heard something. Not wind, not animals. Scratching. Slow. Desperate, like fingernails against wood. He stepped closer to the cemetery gate. Then he heard it again, a muffled scream. He ran. The next morning, the whole village would know, but no one would admit what they heard. By sunrise, rumors spread like fire in dry grass. She was not dead. The earth moved. I heard crying. The widower dismissed it. Grief makes people imagine things. The priest warned against superstition. But by the second night, 3 different villagers reported the same thing. Scratching, then silence, then a thud, like someone hitting wood from the inside. The cemetery guard refused to stay after dark. And then, something happened that changed everything. The soil above Elena's grave had shifted. It was no longer smooth. It had collapsed slightly inward, as if something beneath had moved. Far from the village, Tomas had not disappeared by choice. He had been beaten, warned, told never to return. But love does not obey threats. When he heard she had died, he did not believe it. Elena was not weak. She was afraid, yes, but not fragile. He rode back through the night, and when he arrived at the village edge, he heard the whispers. They say she screams at night. That was enough. Tomas stormed into the square, demanding the grave be opened. The widower refused. The priest hesitated, but fear spreads faster than authority. By the third night of reported screams, the villagers agreed, if only to silence the rumors. Torches surrounded the cemetery. Shovels struck earth. The deeper they dug, the quieter everyone became. Then, the sound. A faint knock. From below. Someone dropped their torch. The digging became frantic. Soil flew. The coffin lid appeared. Scratched. They pulled it out. The wood was marked. Long lines. Broken fingernails embedded in splinters. The lid was forced open, and what they saw made hardened men fall backward. Elena was turned onto her side. Her fingers were bloodied. Her dress torn at the shoulders, her mouth frozen open as if she had been screaming until the very last breath. But she was no longer alive. She had woken, she had fought, and she had suffocated in darkness. She had not died at the altar. She died alone, underground. The village doctor examined her body again. His hands trembled. He admitted something quietly. There were no signs of illness, no poison, no heart failure. What happened at the altar was likely a fainting spell, a rare medical condition known at the time as death-like sleep. In the 1800s, medicine was limited. Pulse detection was primitive. Many were buried too soon, and Elena became one of them. But this was not simply a medical tragedy. This was the result of forced marriage, of pressure, of fear, of a young woman who had no voice in her own life. When Tomas saw her hands, he collapsed. He placed his forehead against the coffin edge and whispered, "I should have taken you that night." He blamed himself for waiting, for hoping, for believing love would be enough. They say he never left the village again. He visited her grave daily, until winter, until illness, until one day he was buried beside her. But this is not where the story ends, because Elena's grave changed history. Her death forced new burial laws, coffins with bells, safety measures, delayed burials, and a fear that still lingers today. What if they bury you too soon?
Elena's death did not remain a village secret. Word spread beyond the hills, to nearby towns, to doctors, to churches, because this was not an isolated case. In the 18th and 19th centuries, people feared one thing more than death itself: being buried alive. At the time, there were no heart monitors, no brain scans, no modern medicine. Doctors checked breath with mirrors, pulse with fingers. If you were cold, unmoving, silent, you were declared dead. Thousands were buried this way. Some graves were later found disturbed, some coffins opened, some bodies turned. Scratches, broken nails, twisted limbs, proof that the dead had once been alive. Elena became one of the names whispered in medical halls, not as a woman, but as a warning. After cases like Elena's, fear reshaped burial traditions. Inventors began designing what were called safety coffins. Inside the coffin, a string tied to the hand, a bell placed above the grave. If the buried person woke up, they could ring for help. Some cemeteries hired night guards, whose only job was to listen. Most bells never rang, but a few did. And when they did, people asked a terrifying question: how many bells never rang because no one was listening? Tomas became part of the cemetery's landscape. Rain, snow, sun. He came every day. He repaired broken headstones, cleared weeds, repainted Elena's marker. At night, he slept near her grave. People said he talked to her, that he apologized, that he asked for forgiveness. And sometimes, late at night, villagers claimed they heard two voices near the grave, one living, one not. And then, Tomas stopped coming. Days passed, then weeks. The grave grew silent again. When Tomas's body was found, there were no signs of violence. He had not been attacked. He had not been robbed. He had walked willingly into the cemetery. He lay beside Elena's grave, peaceful, as if he had finally decided to stop waiting. The villagers buried him next to her. Two graves, side by side. No bell, no safety measures, just earth. Years passed, generations changed, but the grave remained. Caretakers reported strange things, soil disturbances without cause, flowers appearing overnight, scratches found on old coffin fragments during renovations. No one claimed it was a ghost. They claimed something worse. Memory, a story too tragic to die. Parents warned daughters, doctors delayed burials, priests questioned tradition. Elena's fate reshaped how death was treated, because love had exposed a mistake that silence had buried. But the most disturbing part of this story was not Elena's death. It was what historians later discovered about how many others shared her fate, and how close modern medicine still comes to making the same mistake.
Decades after Elena's death, historians began uncovering records that chilled the soul. Medical journals, church logs, cemetery reports. They told the same story again and again. People buried too early. Some exhumed days later with bodies turned over. Some with clenched fists. Some with scratches inside the lid. These weren't legends. They were documented facts. In Germany, France, England, and Eastern Europe, doctors quietly admitted the truth. They had mistaken stillness for death. Elena was not rare. She was remembered because her story survived. Even today, the fear remains. That's why some cultures delay burial, why wakes exist, why bodies are observed for hours, sometimes days. The phrase "saved by the bell" is believed by many to come from those safety coffins. A bell ringing from underground meant life. Silence meant death. And sometimes, silence meant no one was listening. Elena and Tomas were never married. Not by church, not by law, but history joined them. Two graves side by side. Visitors left flowers without knowing why. Caretakers noticed something strange. The flowers on Elena's grave always lasted longer, as if the ground itself refused to forget her. She did not die because she was weak. She died because no one listened, because love was forbidden, because tradition spoke louder than truth. And Tomas, he didn't die from heartbreak. He died from waiting too long to choose love over fear. Historians ask one question that has no comforting answer. How many Elenas never had their graves reopened? How many Tomases arrived too late? How many love stories ended beneath the soil without a sound being heard? Tonight, as you listen to this story, remember this: the past is not as distant as we think. Fear still makes decisions. Silence still buries truth. And love still demands courage. Elena's story did not change the world, but it changed how the world buries its dead. And that is how love survived, not in life, but in warning. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but to prove her voice is still heard. This is Echoes of Forbidden Love, and some loves never rest in silence.